Hello everyone and welcome. I'm going to be speaking about the 10th round of the Fide chess.com Women's Grand Swiss. I'm home. I am all settled in. Of course, it's been a couple weeks since the tournament and I finally found the time to record this. Of course, I prefer the no cam, so I don't have to worry too much about the way I look or the expressions I'm pulling when I've made bad moves. But let's dive in. I played against Divya. I am from India, and it was quite an interesting game. Just a reminder to all players out there, and this is no relation to the game that was played. Please have a total and utter respect for your opponent. Please keep in mind that they're humans too, and distractions exist. So let's dive in. I'll try to make this analysis as short and educational as possible. Of course, we have the French defense, just a fair warning before we start. It is a French defense, and those of you who are wanting to learn the French defense, this is the perfect place to be, because I did incorporate the French quite a lot in my games. It's just because I've been playing it for so long and I find a lot of comfortability in it. So let's begin. We have e4, e6, d4, d5, e5, c5, c3. And here we have something called the advanced variation. And of course, you will see that when it comes to the French, there are several ways of playing. There's knight to c3, which is categorized as the whenever. There are several other ways of playing with bishop d3, pushing the pawn, of course. You have the exchange variation. You also have knight d2, which is the Tarash. And here my opponent opted for the advanced variation. So c5, c3, knight to c6, all natural moves. Knight f3. Commonly played is also f4, but it does become quite a dynamic line with later trying to get the queen on this diagonal. And if the king castles, there's always tricks on the e5 pawn and eventually trying to just undermine the center as well as the king side. So knight f3, and the main move, queen to b6. Bishop d3 was played. Of course, you have moves like bishop to e2, after which black can play knight to h6, because if the bishop captures the knight, you just have queen takes b2. So instead, my opponent played bishop to d3. And a big mistake here would be to take on d4, capturing back and taking again, because the moment you trade, you think you have won a pawn, but unfortunately there is this intermediate check on b5 and losing the queen. And I have fallen for this at a national championship before, back in 2000, and I'm sure it was 11 or 12, one of those years. I was about 15 years old. Yes, so bishop d7 makes sure that this pawn is free, but even after castling, it's still not recommended to take. And the reason for that is white will gain so much development in the time that you've taken to capture the pawn. So I think it continues like this. And maybe here there's knight c3, or I think just bishop e3. Because after takes, it's just, yes, white is down 2 pawns. Maybe you can even play like, maybe you can play like this. I'm sure it's playable, but very risky. So here I decided to not take. Instead, I just played f5. The reason I played f5, it wasn't a planned move or anything, it was just over the board. I decided to go for something a little bit different. And the reason for that is here my opponent has to make a decision. And either way, the decision is important because either you play en passant. Of course, f6 gives them the choice to always take later on. But f5 puts the ball in their court and says, well, you gotta take it now, otherwise my king side will be relatively safe and you won't be able to do anything about it. So she decided to ignore it, and I just took on d4 and took on c3, happy to grab the pawn. And I think in this position it's quite critical to decide where to place my pieces. Of course, I don't have as much space as white, so I really have to be careful with regards to what I decide here. Of course, there's bishop c5, there's bishop e7, but where does the knight go? If I play knight h6, my plan was after takes, I have rook g8, and white has c4. Quite a natural move, trying to open up the king side. When your king is safe and your opponent's king is still in the center, the main target is to open files in the center, and that's exactly what she's trying to do. And yeah, I decided to play knight to b4. Probably a more logical option would have been to simply take and try to develop this way. Maybe playing something like long castles looks a bit more solid. Of course, there are constant weaknesses, but I do feel as though I've sort of solidified a little bit. There's also rook b1 that I have to worry about. I can just bring the queen back and try to play from here. But instead, let's go back to the current position. Right. Knight b4, capturing on d5, knight takes bishop, and bishop to b5. So I just decided to take the exchange, and probably it's already worse for me just because my king is in so much danger and my pieces are not developed at all. Here, white has 3 developed pieces, I only have 1. So it was incredibly difficult for me to solve my problems. I continue to capture and try some things, but probably it's over at this point, and we have the final moves on the board over here. I don't think I have to go further than that. So just going back for a second, I really like the ASMR board moves. I probably don't have to go after this exchange. In this position, I think I'm completely fine. I just have to take. I think knight b4 was a bit of a stretch. And even in this position, I can take like this. Perhaps I was very worried about the imminent danger of my king and queen. Just because rook b1 is coming really quickly, and there are always placements like knight to d4. Of course, I have this squares compensation, and perhaps I get my pieces out quicker than maybe I thought. But anyway, it was a game, and yeah, the last round was definitely something exciting.